back to Strikes Our Fancy, the show where three gentlemen talk about whatever piques their interest in a given week. I am one of your hosts, Crying Craig. Along with me this week I have...
The Tragedy of Caleb.
And I'm Regretful Rob.
And we're doing a bit of a change of pace from last week. Last week we was very confrontational, and we thought we were feeling a little bad and feeling a little down about what we talked about last week. And so we have a very special guest this week to bring the mood down and calm things out a little bit. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So I'm a sad but true Stacy.
Oh. Welcome. Great to have you.
Thank you. I've had a few things running around my head recently. A large part of that is a question of authenticity and what comprises authenticity, both in art and in life, and specifically like what is involved with authenticity and the release of emotion with authenticity.
Interesting.
So just a few things to talk about today, I guess.
Yeah. If you listener can't tell, Stacy came to us strong with this idea, and we were like, hell yes. So she's actually, you might be doing a little bit leading of the conversation tonight.
Right.
Which is totally fine. I feel like I feel like I'm interested enough in this topic that I could maybe even write a dissertation. So I came with the receipts for sure.
Nice.
But
I'll be happy to read it.
Yeah. So I guess a recent puzzle that I've had, or a connection or realization I've made, concerns a person that's very close to me that I consider my mom. Not my biological mom, but someone I consider my mother in all the ways that matter. Yeah. She is in a book club, and the members take turns picking books. And as a result, she reads some things that she would typically not read. And one of the things she sometimes grouses about is that she doesn't like books that make her feel things. She likes to read things that don't get too heavy, and any tension or drama that happens in the book, she likes to be able to tie that all up in a bow and put it away or pretty it up, if that makes sense.
Stamp it with resolved.
Correct. She loves resolution, I'll just say. Or if there's a logical puzzle, I think that also stems back to resolution.
There's a hole in the logic of the story that bugs her?
No, I mean she specifically reads mysteries to solve a logical puzzle.
Okay.
So she either needs it to be a happy ending kind of deal, or a feel good kind of situation, or a logical puzzle that can resolve itself.
Okay.
So she needs it like real life where we always get answers.
Right. 100%. Yeah. I love you, Mom. No, but essentially she likes to read for fun.
Sure.
So she likes, like I said, cozy mysteries, or logic puzzles. I'm intrigued by that because the books in art and media that I seek out or that I find most powerful are very unfun.
Sure.
They're very I want it to be impactful rather than
I'm going to pick up this book and I want it to wreck me.
Right.
This is not going to be a fun ride, but I'm here for it.
Yeah. So I think the whole concept of why we consume the media that we consume and why we identify with those things or need those things as part of the human experience is just a really fun concept in general.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Right? But yeah, no, there is. It's very broad. That's why I said I could maybe write a dissertation on this. But she sees my reading habits as sort of masochistic almost.
Why are you doing that to yourself?
Which maybe it is, right? I mean so that's an interesting concept as well. Again, why do we consume the media that we consume? Mm-hmm. But anyway, so long story long, I'd like to have a dialogue between the link between authenticity, vulnerability, and sadness or struggle or grief or trauma, those kinds of things, versus possibly, if we have time, the flip side of the coin would be comedy, resolution, and or lack of authenticity for a reason, or a purpose.
Sure.
So as a way to sort of explain why I'm interested in this in the first place, I think it would be helpful for you guys to understand me and my background.
Sure. Please. Mm-hmm.
In my family of origin, I grew up in an extremely conservative, fundamentalist iteration of Christianity.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Yeah. I was the oldest of 11 kids.
Whoa.
So if you're thinking Duggars, that's not far off. So I was raised in a secluded farm as well, outside of White. So my parents did that very intentionally so that we would not be like exposed to these like secular
Right.
ideas.
Yeah, this very controlled environment.
Very, very controlled environment. And they homeschooled me in my formative years as well.
Okay.
So like literally my only exposure to like the outside world was anything I could sort of like surreptitiously read.
Sure.
Sure, yeah.
So
Because a movie or a TV show, they'll probably be able to see what's in it and be like, no, you can't do that. But a
Oh,
book,
right.
you can
Exactly.
hide. You can be like, no, it's got Jesus on the front. It's fine.
Well, and there was a lot of that too. Like when I was growing up, obviously, like Harry Potter was a big deal.
Mhm.
And in the religious right community, like that was a
Yeah.
big no-no.
Yeah.
Witchcraft and wizardry and all that. But what my parents didn't know was that like I agreed to not read Harry Potter as a child, but I was reading like Philip Pullman, like Killing God,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like I was like, they were like, oh, don't read this third grade level book that dabbles in magic, and I was like up here like,
Yep.
oh, we're killing God
Yeah,
now.
we're gonna jump a few rungs.
Yeah.
Is that Golden Compass?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So
Hearing that, I hope I'm not trampling over a point you're going to make later, but I almost wonder, a lot of especially women that are in the hyper-fundamentalist family structure, they have this like innate sadness that they don't realize. Do you think maybe that has something to do with why your mom doesn't like to read tragic books?
So the mom I was talking about originally is not the same mom as like
yeah,
my
of course,
family
yes.
of origin.
I'm sorry.
However, do I think that it impacts what I do read? Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's an element of like how you grew up, how you were raised, the morals you were sort of like
Spoon-fed.
indoctrinated with.
No. Only
and
the gays
everybody had-
indoctrinate people.
Yeah, right. Exactly. No, I think everyone to a certain extent has that. It's just different based on the moral compass you were sort of taught as a child.
Right.
Okay.
And some people were very spoon-fed that, and some people were like, sort of laissez-faire about that.
Right.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to raise you to be a productive member of society, but that if I get that done, good enough.
Yeah.
Like-
Yeah. I think in my case, it was very like, you are going to, this is the truth, like capital T.
Yep.
And there was very little room for anything else,
Mhm.
little to no room for anything else. Anyway, like as a kid, like I would just read, not only as a way to like escape my situation, but also as a way to learn,
Yeah.
because I was not really like my homeschooling, like sort of curriculum. The textbooks that I was reading like said the earth was 6,000 years old,
Right.
and that
Oh,
like
geez.
evolution was not a real thing.
Right. It all comes with the religious skew.
Oh yeah,
Like,
100%. It was just like a continuation of like
Yeah.
church,
Sure.
right? And so I like learned at a pretty like young age. I was having some cognitive dissonance. Let's put it that way.
Critical about the world
Yeah.
around you.
Yeah,
So was-
exactly.
Was the math textbook kind of like, so Paul has 6 cattle and Joseph has 7?
Two daughters.
Yeah. 2 daughters.
Is this an equitable trade?
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, that's another episode. But it's honestly like it's a joke, but it's like not that far off.
Oof.
Right? So yeah, definitely. We
Okay.
could and should go into that
We'll
at
table
another
that.
time. But anyway, so like this information that I was being given, like I could kind of tell from a pretty early age that this was maybe not like, at least there was some tension between like what I was being told and like the secular world
Sure.
as I was taught.
If I could pry a little bit, when you were still a child and kind of under the care of your parents, were you rebelling at all? Was any of that like showing to them, or was it all internalized? You had it and you were reading it and you knew that this other stuff existed, but were you keeping it to yourself?
I think it ends up being degrees, right?
Okay.
So I think it was definitely mostly internalized.
Okay.
I imagine there would be a lot of fear that if your parents found out, hey, reading is indoctrinating you, that
Right.
your one escape.
Well, like they say, like the difference between like religion and a cult is what they do when you try to leave,
Mhm.
right? And so by me taking these steps, I knew that I could suffer very serious consequences. And like at, 10 years old, all you want to do is please your parents like that.
Sure,
And
yeah.
of course, as secluded as I was, that was the main relationship I had was
It'd be
with
world
my
shattering.
family.
Yeah, your world would shatter if that changed.
Correct. Yeah. I think a lot of my reading and stuff sort of came upon, it became something that allowed me to cope, but it also allowed me to like learn about the world.
Right. Grow beyond the fence you were being kept in.
Right. And as I realized that was happening, the fence was happening, the more I wanted to read.
Would you say voracious? Like,
oh, yeah. I mean, I would go to the library and get like 25 books at a time.
wow.
And I would read probably 25 books in 2 weeks.
Did the librarian kind of see what you were doing? Kind of like,
Yeah,
oh,
I
she's
do
reading,
not-
she's reading
yeah.
Philip Pullman.
I don't think it mattered so much to
a
them that
Christian
I was
book.
reading
Yeah.
that. I think if my mom had known that I was reading that there would have been huge issues.
So
but like they had my parents were too busy.
Yeah. I mean, 11 kids.
Yeah. So they were not like looking over my shoulder, making sure I was adhering.
Oh,
Sure.
she's reading. That's great.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a polar bear on the cover.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So anyway, all this is to say, I read a lot, and reading became a way for me to also like sort of, I still struggle with the word escape because I think that has a lot of connotations that I don't necessarily want to convey.
Sure.
Like I'm not necessarily like totally upset about the way I was raised. There were a lot of good things about it, but there were also a lot of traumatic experiences as well.
Expand maybe is a better word.
Expand. Yeah. So all of that made me sort of realize that literature is either a mirror or it's a window. This is a common metaphor, like when we're talking about literature or like art in general. So it either reflects your experience back to you, or it allows you to see other people's experience.
Right.
And so I think a lot of preference, or maybe an uncomfortability about that preference, might be sort of like due to that, where you're maybe not so comfortable with the mirrors.
Because we are all the best at ignoring our own faults. And so having a mirror held up to you that shows those faults is incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah, for
Craig,
sure.
are you saying that you are capable of ignoring your own faults?
Yes. And highly avoidant. My mirror is very foggy.
Oh God.
Like-
I spend all day looking in that mirror. I gotta stop doing that.
But you don't.
I
Don't we all, though?
But
Don't we all?
that's the thing, though, Rob. What you don't realize, denial is so much easier. Just lean into it. Just ignore it, and it's fine. If you don't recognize that there's a problem, there is no problem.
Oh yeah, okay.
This is all hyperbole, by the way. I don't actually think this. I feel like I need to preface
No,
that.
Craig is actually in reality a huge nerd.
Yeah.
No, he's not.
No, but I mean, like, I think just the idea of being able to see yourself or your experience validated in literature is like a huge deal, which is why like representation matters,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I say literature, but I mean like art more generally,
Sure.
right? In paintings, books, movies, whatever media you choose to consume. But anyway, the books made me question why, right? So I'm looking for authenticity. I'm looking for like, because like in the Christian faith, right? Lying in particular is seen as like a huge no-no, obviously. But there's also like lying by omission, right? So like leaving things out.
Doesn't count in my book.
So when I'm
That
reading,
was how I rationalized my behavior growing up. Doesn't count.
so when I'm like reading these other experiences and having this cognitive dissonance, like I want to know why I'm feeling that way.
Sure.
And books allowed me to have the vocabulary to then figure that out.
Good for you for being able to, like, at a younger age, recognize, like, oh, this is uncomfortable. Why is it uncomfortable? Rather than being like, this is uncomfortable, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
You know, I just joked about that, but, like, that is an incredibly insightful thing to do.
I think it was less insightful at the moment and more of a survival technique,
Oh, okay.
if that makes sense, that developed into a special interest or like the survival sort of instinct led to the growth rather than like any sort of prodigiousness on my part.
Just take the credit.
I'm very uncomfortable. No, just kidding. So I was seeking basically truth and used reading to search for logic, reasoning, and meaning. For me, in my lived experience, it's been about figuring out the why. And due to my ingrained moral compass, for me, this has always been completely integrated with authenticity and truth. And that part has served me well in the real world, right?
Yeah.
People appreciate and respect authenticity, I feel like.
Yeah, they respond to it well, typically.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
So there's a lot to dive into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So specifically around, I want to hone in on the authenticity element.
Yeah.
Because when you were doing this voracious reading, were you reading a mix of fiction and nonfiction? Did you have like a preference of one over the other?
I think I preferred fiction.
Okay.
But I read some nonfiction also.
Sure. Because I think it's interesting that you talk about this sense of authenticity, but fiction is inherently a lie.
True.
You know, so how do you reconcile the idea of developing authenticity based on what you're reading or consuming when it's set in a world that doesn't exist?
Yeah. Well, I mean, interestingly enough, if you think about what the Bible is,
Mhm.
and again, I'm not trying to push anybody's buttons, but like it reads like a fantasy book.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the first genres I turned to was fantasy
Mhm.
because it was very similar to what I'd been sort of like led to
Mhm.
or what was comfortable with the added like magic or whatever
Right. I mean,
from
what's
like
The difference between Jesus
I mean,
and a wizard.
God, magic, you know, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, some of the greatest fiction of our lifetimes are based on, you know, the Christian creation story and the Christian salvation story. Like, that's Lord of the Rings, like in a nutshell, basically.
Isn't that Dune too? A little bit. Isn't Paul Atreides supposed to be that?
I would say it's different because that story is told from Paul's perspective as the savior. The whole time he is very transparent about that he is using the people that he's saving to get what he needs as well. So
A prophet using the people.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like, that's the difference is like he's open about it, at least
Right.
in the narrative.
Yeah.
But bringing it back to Lord of the Rings, though, Tolkien specifically said it was not allegorical. And he was actually good friends with C.S.
Mhm.
Lewis, and they had like a literary group. C.S. Lewis then took like the hard right.
Right.
And like if you want to talk about like explicitly allegorical, like Aslan
the line.
is God.
Right. Yeah. I should restate, specifically around Lord of the Rings. It's like, I know Tolkien wanted to lean away from some of those tropes, but it's like you were, the original point you brought up, that there's these parallels that just exist in fantasy. It's because maybe some of these books were a little fantastic to begin with. And a salvation story is always going to have at least roughly the same shape.
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the way we talk about authenticity too, like in our society, we have authenticity and struggle like encoded in our vocabulary.
Mhm.
Like how many of us have said the struggle is real, right? Or sad but true, like I said, sad but true, Stacy. Or like what really living looks like. Or proving that you're serious about a career or a partner or something like that. All of that implies through the language that to be authentic or to be real, you have to have that struggle.
Do you think those kind of idiomatic nomenclature exist, though, to simplify the dialogue? Rather than discuss the struggle, I'm just going to acknowledge there is one in this phrase that everyone's comfortable with and move on.
You're talking about the triteness of the
Yeah,
phrase?
yes.
100%. I think one of the most fascinating parts like of our culture is like social media, right? And like the concept of you posting something, for instance, on Instagram, you posting a picture, right? But it's behind filters.
Right.
And it's
It's a
only
posed
of like
picture.
a good day.
Staged, right.
And it's not like it has very little to do with like a person's authentic experience.
Sure.
Although it is integral, right? I mean, that's why, people use it, is because it is a way of like communicating your life.
Mhm.
But how authentic is it?
Not, in my opinion, not at all.
Yeah.
I have a very hard line on social media, and I apologize, listener, if this applies to you, or anyone in this room, maybe I should clarify. The more someone posts on social media, I just naturally assume the more unhappy they are. Like, if you're living more vicariously through this window pane that people get to see in your life, and you're putting more and more effort into projecting that, I just naturally assume you're unhappy with what you really are and what you're really going through.
Yeah, it's true. I post a lot of memes on social media, and I'm deeply unhappy.
I was just getting ready to say it. I was like, what are you saying about me? I post funny shit.
Yeah. I should clarify specifically about self, like to the posed images and to projecting, oh, look how happy we are. Look how amazing my life is. Yeah, memes are great. Memes are memes.
Well, you're not on Facebook, but you haven't seen me posting the sad music lyrics recently. So
yeah.
that's been happening.
Well, I mean, that is the other part of it, right? Is like, so we expect people to be authentic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we want that authenticity.
Yeah, that was
So
just,
that-
I was about to say.
So I think the criticism of like things like Instagram are that it's just a brief snapshot and it's through many filters, right?
Right.
So we actually, I think, don't like that necessarily. However, like on the flip side of that, you have people like posting on Facebook like, my ex and I are fighting and blah, 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 like really in-depth like emotional stuff as well, but we also don't like that.
Right. That there's an inherent like, ugh, why did you do this in a public space?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Do that behind closed doors like every other normal repressed human being.
And then bottle it up.
Yeah.
And I think that gets to like maybe sort of the root of what I kind of got to as far as like this line of reasoning, in the sense that like, so the personal sort of more like poetic or like very personal like journaling and that kind of thing is like a private thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very cathartic to do that sort of thing. And a lot of people find like that very helpful. And actually, I think we'll probably talk about that at the end as well.
Sure.
But that's private, right? As opposed to posting a private thing on a public platform.
I was just about to say, like, motivation matters so much there. Like, are you writing genuinely for yourself and no one's ever going to see it? Or are you writing something that you're like, well, I'll share this later? With that mindset, you are going to write vastly different things. What self filters are you going to put on what you create if you know eventually someone's going to see it? Versus, I don't generally believe that you can be authentic if you are planning to share something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if you do make the best effort to be yourself, you still know, well, I don't want to share too much. I don't want to expose too much of myself because someone else is going to see this at some point.
Right. Or even if it's not necessarily about yourself, if you're writing in a journal about an interaction you had with somebody, and you think someone else might read that,
Yeah.
well, you're not going to be 100% honest there.
Yeah.
So that brings up an interesting question, right? Is something that's curated for public consumption, say a book or a movie, able to convey authenticity then?
Well, so I think there's two different things there, because a narrative story can convey authentic emotions. It can convey authentic situations without necessarily conveying the truth or the reality of the subject.
So I'm very intrigued by this, though. Like the barrier that we put up between what is personally applicable to us and what is universally applicable to the human experience. Why do we do that as humans?
Well, because we're all the main character of our own story. I assume the shit that I'm going through is unique to me, no matter, because I don't know that anyone else is dealing with exactly the same situation, and because none of us talk about it to that level of detail. I'm going to know the little dirty details of the situations I'm going through, but for most people, we're not going to share that.
First of all, Craig, I'm an NPC. I just go home and charge, and I'm ready with like little quips.
I only come talk to you when you have the yellow exclamation point.
Exactly. I have missions for people, so...
that you do walk around with like a beam of light on you. Like it's uncanny.
Actually, I was going to say, I feel exactly the opposite.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of what I don't share, I feel is incredibly common and nobody wants to hear about it. Let's say someone asks you, hey, how was your day? You're not going to go into, oh man, I put my socks on this morning and stepped in some water that I spilled and, oh, it was just a horrible day. Just say I'm fine, because all of that is the human condition and nobody wants to hear it because they've all experienced it. Nobody cares.
Rob, I want to hear it because I've experienced it. I hate wet socks. So
is it not cathartic to know that you're not alone?
I know. I already know.
Okay.
The whole world sucks and everybody hates it.
So you agree there has to be some struggle for authenticity.
Oh, God. I've never agreed with anything anyone said on this show.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
There has to be struggle for authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's... I wouldn't agree with that as a blanket statement, because you can have a very joyous and happy experience, and that's authentic.
Well, I'm not going to say that. I think a lot of artists who have had torturous existences have. I'm not saying, okay, maybe it is. Maybe I'm saying it has helped produce that art that they've created.
Mm-hmm.
You know, would they be? I'm not saying people deserve to go through that shit, but like, would they have produced that same art without having gone through that struggle? Probably not.
Right.
So that's my opinion on that.
Right. So I guess what I'm trying to clarify is, to me, authenticity isn't necessarily bound to struggle and hardship. You can be authentic on the opposite end of that spectrum as well, but it's going to come off as bragging. My day was great, and I found $20, and I had a great lunch, and everything was wonderful.
And we're going to block that guy.
Yeah.
I think for one to exist, the other also has to exist, right?
Ooh. I was wondering if we were going to get into this. I
Yeah.
struggle with that concept a little bit.
I think that, so this is why I wanted to talk about the dichotomy, right?
Mm.
Between authenticity and struggle and like sort of comedy and like resolution, right? Because traditionally, like comedy is resolution, right? It's like, well, in a literary sense, comedy results in marriage at the end. So like it literally is like that kind of like resolution.
Huh.
Like a comedy, like it, as far as like a genre, like not talking about stand up or anything, but comedy as like a literary genre, like ends up in marriage. So like if a play is a comedy, then it ends up in marriage. If it's a tragedy, it ends up in death. You know,
you're talking about genre and not the nature of humor,
right?
Okay.
Yeah. I just think it's interesting that we have evolved sort of like our references regarding these terms, right? So like I think today we have a concept of comedy that's maybe like different from in the past, right?
Sure.
Comedy has evolved from being like situational comedy in the sense of like sort of like dramatic irony where like wrong place, wrong time, or like hit somebody over the head by accident and then you turn around and there's the pan and the bad and the whatever. Right. And it's evolved into sort of like a social commentary almost, but with a filter. Right. What makes something funny?
Ooh, I actually have this.
Oh?
The one note you had?
Yeah. It comes back to Aristotle's dictum and the ha, guffaw, ah, ha, ha formula.
Okay.
There's a quote from King of the Hill.
Oh.
Okay. I was like, oh, interestingly enough, I was going to talk about Plato, but.
Oh, yeah.
Well, talk about him when he can go to Hank Hill.
I know.
Right, yeah. Hey, this is Bobby. So when you said you were talking about tragedy, that is one thing I was hoping you would bring up, was the inherent link between comedy and tragedy. Because in that formula that I said, there is some truth to that, because it starts with the ah, which is, in my opinion, that is a tragic situation has occurred. Yeah. Something that is
gasp worthy.
Right, yeah. And then there's a guffaw as you realize, hey, something is going to happen here that is unexpected. And then, yeah, that tragedy unexpectedly turns either much worse or it turns out for the better, which is wholly not authentic in any way.
I mean, I think so. So even in Craig's example of like being totally blissfully happy, earlier we talked about like marriage, for instance.
Mhm.
Even with that, though, I mean, you think about dating and like what it takes for you to get to the place where you're happily married. There's a lot of struggle there.
Big air quotes on that happily that I heard.
There's some struggle there, though.
Mhm.
I mean, like again, not being very articulate, but I think that's a universal human experience as well.
No
To
relationship.
have a crush.
No relationship is seamless. There's
Right.
always going to be rough edges in any relationship. It doesn't romantic or not. It's never going to be perfect.
Right. Unless you're on Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Unless you get to pick and choose exactly what
Right.
you share with the world.
And I think that imperfection is what is most authentic. Like you're not going in saying like, I mean, I am not perfect. You know, our significant others, I'm sure, are not perfect.
Right.
Even though, you know, we like to think of them as that. So there is struggle. There's always struggle.
Yeah. And compromise.
But is not the moment that you share with a significant other of sitting quietly in a room together and you just share a momentary glance at each other, and it's not even a very intimate situation. You just look into each other's eyes and
Just
you
genuine-
share a moment of love.
enjoying each other's company.
Right.
Just no speaking, nothing's actually happening.
Right.
Just enjoying
Is that
the presence.
not an incredibly authentic moment?
It is, because it includes, whether you say it out loud or not, all of the context of all of the struggle that you've gone through to get to the place where you're comfortable enough with that person to share that moment.
And while I fundamentally, for the most
I
part,
agree.
I agree, I really struggle with this concept of contrast is necessary for appreciation, because that gets taken to extremes that are unhealthy.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and that's where I'm resistant. If you're picking up on any resistance from me, that's where it's coming from. Is like, that has been used to justify some awful shit. Well, you have to feel bad so that you can really appreciate the good. It's like, no, I genuinely don't believe that.
Had to cheat on you so you'd appreciate when I don't.
Yeah, exactly. if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. I don't like sentiments like that. I don't think it is as simple as that. And like I said, I think it can be taken to an incredibly unhealthy extreme.
So do you think that longing glance is more impactful or less impactful with the context involved?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It is a good question, and it because in the moment, consciously, probably not even thinking about it. Like, I think I could have that moment with my partner and not even think about it. Just be like, I am content in this moment. It's a nice day. I'm here in my home. Our basic needs are fulfilled, and I have someone to share it with. I think sometimes it's not any more complicated than that.
Mhm.
But it can be. It can be, oh man, we went through all this shit to get to this point, and that's nice. So
Right.
I still don't think it's necessary, I think, to your question.
Although on the other hand,
That's why it's a discussion.
I will agree with this idea that it makes things more authentic, because on the flip side, let's flip it the other way around. You're in a heated moment. You are just crazy angry at each other.
I am filled with self-righteous anger.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with your hypothetical. That's just me right now.
Just
Right now,
general
always,
state.
constantly.
Always. That is my constant state of living.
General state of
Yeah.
existence.
So you have this moment of just unbridled rage at each other for whatever reason, because he doesn't floss his teeth. And if there weren't for those tender moments, this anger would quickly boil over and become a parting of ways.
Right.
They'd
It would, destroy what you have.
Right.
You need the glue.
So yeah, it makes this fight more authentic, because you're really trying to get to, even if the fight is about flossing teeth. Well, is it really that, or is it really, hey, don't you care enough about me to make sure your breath smells good?
I think we need to define authentic, because to me, what you just described is you're veiling the actual situation with a different situation,
Well, right,
which
right.
can be authentic.
But if if this is just an argument that two unrelated people are having, then we press stop and the podcast ends. Or we keep going and finally come to the authentic reason for this argument.
Okay. I don't know. I think I might be thinking about it a little differently, and that's why maybe we need to define.
So it's funny you say you would like a definition because I have one.
Glad somebody came prepared.
So authenticity, according to the good old Wikipedia, is the concept of personality in the fields of psychology, existential psychotherapy, existentialist philosophy, and aesthetics. In existentialism, authenticity is the degree to which a person's actions are congruent with his or her values and desires, despite external pressures to social conformity.
So being true to yourself.
Right.
Only a single link to philosophy.
Right, exactly.
So I maybe it's just a bad example, because in your example that you're mentioning, Rob, to me, you're not being authentic because you're not actually fighting about the thing you're mad about. You're not being true to yourself and what you're upset about.
I think you're getting hung up there.
Yeah,
because
probably.
that's the whole point of what I'm saying is you're not being authentic. And if it weren't for the rest of the relationship, all the good of the relationship, that would just be the end of the argument, the end of the relationship. But
you would divest.
Because of, in the same way we're saying that because of all the angst and anger, that tender loving moment becomes more authentic. This argument becomes more authentic because maybe you don't in this exact particular instance get to the root of it, but eventually that will come out because the argument goes on. It keeps coming because
I feel like that implies I'm a healthy, well-adjusted person, Rob. Which that's just not true.
Well, would you say that you're more authentic with strangers? Because you had implied in that statement that if you were having this talk with a stranger, you just straight up tell the stranger, you have bad breath, you should floss your teeth. Whereas with a lover or a partner, you're veiling it with, you should floss your teeth. I'm not going to tell you why. You should know why, but I'm not going to tell you why.
Softening the blow.
So is the authentication not there? In
when I was in the Army, this guy got his wisdom teeth out, and
which he likely didn't need.
Right. I don't know exactly what happened, but it was bad. Yeah. He was bedridden for like 3-4 days.
Ooh.
And he stopped brushing his teeth. And I assume because it hurt.
Sure.
But months go by and he's just not brushing his teeth. And there is like this miasma around him. Like you cannot stand around this guy without smelling stale breath. Yeah. And this was in training. So people were bunking with him. I don't know how they survived that because walking by his room, you could smell it.
Wow.
And nobody said anything to him for all this time.
Sure.
Until the last day of training when, I did tell him, I said, before you go to your final base, you need to start brushing your teeth again because I'm standing in front of you, facing away from you, and I can smell it.
Yeah.
So I would tell somebody, but not until that relationship is done.
Exactly. Yeah. You had your parachute. Be like, goodbye, I'm bailing.
Yeah. Good luck. This is an authentic moment.
But you weren't willing to be authentic with him until such a time as you were never going to see him again. It's still essentially a stranger. So are we built as humans to be more authentic with strangers than with the people we love?
I feel like there's an inherent, am I going to have to deal with the consequence?
Yeah.
If I don't have to deal with the consequence, I'll be as authentic as hell.
Right.
Yes. Well, and I heard a quote, and I'm not sure where it's attributed to, unfortunately, but it was basically.
It means nothing, Stacy. You can't cite your sources here. We're not interested.
Oh damn!
Free dissertation gone.
I'll be gone. I'll
take my
leave.
It's Oscar Wilde.
maybe.
Marcus Aurelius, Albert Einstein.
Yeah. What about that anonymous guy?
Yeah.
What's he up to these days?
Anonymous, yeah. No, but it basically said that honesty without kindness is brutality, right? And if you value your relationship with other people, you're not going to just go around being brutal all the time, right? So, I mean, there is this mediation that has to happen between like what we're thinking or what we're feeling and like what we express. right? And I think like the space in between is actually where we get art.
So I can tell you something without actually saying it to you. I can paint a painting for a guy that his smells like ass, and it's just it's a heaping pile of garbage. And I'm like, hey, I thought of you while I was making this.
I mean, what are memes really?
Yeah.
I mean, memes are touchstones of emotion. That's kind of how I think of memes. It's like, oh, hey, I want to convey an emotion with some sentiment, but I want to be able to get someone to that mindset without having to do much work.
Right. It's a very, very articulate way of accessing the human experience in some way that's relatable for most, if not all, people.
Sure.
Which is why I think it's a great tool. It's a great communication tool.
Mm-hmm. It streamlines things, which, nope, not going to do it. Not going to do it.
And and it has a degree of impersonality as well, right? Because it's more universal and because it's less detailed.
Say it.
You're not like trying to attack a specific person.
Yeah.
You're just like saying this experience is valid for me.
Yeah. I'll give it to you, Rob.
No, don't.
Dharma
No,
and
no,
Tanaka. Sorry, we have a running gag about Star Trek. And
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Trekkie, so.
So I think I butchered the quote, but you know what I'm talking about,
yeah.
right? Yeah, the speaking through metaphors to streamline the conversation.
But that's
Captain
what symbols
America,
are.
The reference understood.
Yes.
Yeah. But we as humans, like, that's how art is, right? We use these symbols or these series of experiences to convey a very specific experience.
I think that it can be used that way. But also, I think there's an element of, interpretation to art, that I might create something with a particular idea in mind and someone else sees something completely different. So I don't know that we can blanket statement that art is universal and it always fosters understanding, because it can muddy the waters too.
Oh, of course. And that's why we have literary criticism, right? It's because there are all these different lenses by which we're trying to interpret a piece of art. And what does the author's intention have to do with it? Does it matter?
Nothing. The author dies.
Okay, Mr. Roland Barthes.
I had pretty profound argument in high school with my English teacher about this. And in hindsight, I was wrong. But I argued that an artist or an author has responsibility for how someone interprets their work. And like in hindsight, I'm like, that's dumb. Like that is so stupid. Like young Craig, you're an idiot.
I mean, there is a small extent to where that's true, because if you use a literary device that you know is commonly interpreted one way and say, no, actually I meant something completely different, that is on the author. But
is it? Because what if they genuinely meant it what if they were being authentic? And I'm going to flip this on its head.
Hashtag propaganda. I mean, like, there are forms of art, we'll say in quotes, that are intentionally meant to deceive. I just don't think they're authentic, because inherent in it is a lie, right?
But isn't there a quote, and we'll say this one's by Edgar Allan Poe, because I don't know who it was, that artists use lies to tell the truth?
I'm sure that is a quote, yeah. Well, the whole idea of fiction in general, I mean, that's how we started at this conversation, right?
But you're talking about the artist going into this piece of art, quotes,
with a meaning.
With a lie. He knows it's a lie, and he goes in there thinking, I'm using this to deliberately deceive a population.
Right.
That's the lie, not the lie of the propaganda.
Okay, I was taking it to mean, I thought you were going after like satire and irony, where something is said explicit, but that's not the real meaning of what was said.
Right. And I think that's all very interesting. Like the concept of satire.
Not authentic.
Because there's multiple lenses that you have to know to perceive the work in its intended form. I mean, we're not out here eating babies, right? I mean, Modest Proposal. Like we're not Swifties in that way,
I was just going to say, is that propaganda written by hyenas?
No, but I think, I mean, at the end of the day, I think the idea of like creating art to intentionally manipulate through lying is interesting.
Well, what if that particular propagandist actually believes those are his beliefs and he believes those, and so he deliberately puts it out? So to him, it is a truth. So is that still inherently a lie just because you disagree with those beliefs? Because if somebody with your same beliefs put out something similar and somebody else read it from that different lens, they would, that's a lie, and they're deliberately trying to tend to bamboozle people.
For sure.
Back to motivation.
Yeah.
What was the goal of the piece?
Yeah.
I will take on Craig's role here.
Oh.
And I'll say, so what you're basically saying is that there is no such thing as authentic fiction. Because if you say one thing that's untrue, that is not authentic.
Rob, if I can't make sweeping generalizations anymore, what am I here for?
If you manipulate somebody into thinking a thought that wasn't theirs, that's not authentic anymore.
See, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I'm intrigued that I don't believe that.
Okay. So defend yourself.
I think art in general, unless you're specifically attempting to deceive, is a search for meaning with a capital M and truth with a capital T.
But I would posit that like most people who create art aren't deliberately trying to deceive. I agree. I think most believe in what they're creating and why they're creating it.
I think in an incredibly literal sense, all artists are trying to deceive. They are trying to show you something that says something about the human experience or the world through a lens that is fundamentally not true and not real. But in doing so, they expose something that is true and real.
Right.
So how is that not authentic, Caleb?
Look at Stacy when you say that.
I mean, this is why we're having a discussion, right?
Mm-hmm. You guys are talking so much about motivation and this desire to expose something. And I'm just sitting here on a different page or a different chapter, I guess, because I always assumed art is an attempt to connect. Like that's what I would like. Someone makes something and spreads. If their desire is to eventually, and their motivation is to put it out there, they want to connect in some way with people.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
But connect about what?
Yeah, sure.
Well, and our whole drive as a species is to be connected so that we don't die, right?
Yeah.
Like we're trying for connection. We have to work together as a society. We have to work together as just a community or as a partnership or as, co-workers.
I'm 3 years away from living in my bunker. It's almost done. I won't see another living soul after it's done.
As someone who's basically lived in a bunker. Overrated. I'm just kidding.
So to touch on that point a little bit about, and also a universal point from earlier, I'm going to bring up a story of in relation to like how we connect other people and how that connects us through the art. One of the stories that I've always found really weird on how I connected with, and I don't know why I connect with it, but like Doctor Who, there is the plot point of Donna Noble losing her memory. She's lost this entire point with the Doctor, that entire life she's had with him. And it made her deliberately a better person, but then she regresses. And part of me was like, why does this connect with me? Why is this connecting with people? It is some of people's like favorite endings in the sad sense of a character. She doesn't die, but she essentially does. But that can't happen in real life. And then I was thinking about it, I was like, but it does.
It does,
It does happen in real life. People lose people without losing them,
Well, dementia is one.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think even in these outlandish sci-fi stories that we connect with, that make us, feel the feels, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not in relation to something that's happened to us in our lives, even if it takes place in some far-flung galaxy,
For sure. And would we find them interesting if we didn't identify with them?
Exactly.
But
I personally identify with a person in a blue box, time and space.
But struggle is integral to the human experience. And to pretend like it's not is inauthentic.
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never struggled in my life.
Okay, Instagram.
I was actually just talking with my wife about this a couple days ago. This idea of resiliency when it comes to struggling. That, you know, I think there was a large portion of my life where if something didn't come easy immediately, I just didn't want to do it. Like, you know, I did not want to struggle. I wanted to avoid struggling. And I wanted to do what I was good at, what was easy to me. And I think I've grown and I've changed a little bit from that. And now I'm much more resilient to those struggles. But I think to tie back to art specifically, for someone to create a piece of art and to put it and expose themselves to the world, there's inherent bravery there because there's going to be failure upon failure upon failure where you don't connect with people and you maybe feel ostracized and you feel alone. And the resiliency that someone must have when doing something like that is admirable and part of the human condition. So regardless of whatever art they're making, you could claim that there's an authentic portion of the creation of the art itself.
Well, resilience or resiliency is just another word for struggle, right?
Well, it's how we respond to struggle.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a word for struggle.
The verb to struggle, though? If you're actively struggling, you're also still fighting for what you're looking for.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
I'm not going to say it. No, I'm not gonna say it.
No, say it.
Well,
Say
no,
it.
I'm probably going to cut this out because it's a little too dark, but like until you're not anymore, until you completely give up. Like there is an element of you can completely lose all resiliency and you're still struggling and you seek a way out because you don't want to deal with it anymore. So I would say I would not say all struggling means that there is resiliency.
I don't think you should cut that out, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't think you should either.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's dark. That's
Well,
why
but
I'm trying to get that.
But once you lose that resiliency, you aren't struggling anymore. So I'm with Stacy on this one. If you're struggling, that inherently implies some resilience. And you are right. It can be worn away, but then the struggle stops.
Right, then you've decided.
That's rock bottom. You're done.
Okay.
Craig's got his thinking cap on.
Yeah,
just so
we
you guys know.
Yeah, I got to mull on a little bit.
Well,
I don't have an off the cuff response. I got.
This is the sad episode.
Yeah, it is.
So
Making me feel things I don't want to feel.
okay, Mom.
To tie way back to that, I am one of those people. I will read things that are enjoyable because, I view the world as already a dark and dismal place, and I don't need more of that crap.
But you read Dune.
Yeah, it's because it's an escape. It's a fantasy. It's
Craig wants to live on Arrakis.
Yeah, I don't have to deal with the.
It's objectively a worse world,
but they're not consequences that actually affect me. Okay. Like the things that happen in that world, they can't touch me. They can't hurt me.
Yeah, sure.
And to that point, escapism and so you're talking about the healthy way, right? The unhealthy way is what I experienced in childhood, which is escapism to the point of disassociation from my existence.
Yeah. I joke about living in a perpetual state of self-righteous anger. That's a joke. I genuinely live in a perpetual state of self-distraction. So I don't have to deal with anything in a tangible way.
Until I make you watch sad stuff.
Yeah. Caleb sits me down on the couch and says, all right, we're going to cry for an hour, and then we'll move on.
I've done that 3 times so far, and I'm so proud.
I'm proud of you, too.
Got a moment of genuine human emotion out of Craig.
He's not a robot anymore.
Don't want
he
it.
cries.
Don't like it.
But in that sense, again, feeling is essential to authenticity as well.
Or if I cry at everything, apparently it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's not authentic.
Then it doesn't become
It
extraordinary
loses
anymore.
all meaning. Because apparently we need contrast. Need good and bad.
I've heard that argumentation before, though, in terms of telling people I love you too much. I once heard if you tell people I love you too much, it'll lose its meaning.
Yeah. I don't necessarily agree with that because that's how you're interpreting it. That is how, if someone says that to you too much and you're like, well, I don't like that. That's a you thing.
100%.
It might mean exactly the same thing that they meant the first time.
It does lose its meaning to that person, though.
Right, but that's not the fault of the other individual.
Right.
That's what I'm getting at.
But it does become a less authentic phrase.
I'm not enjoying this.
For the record,
we can just apparently throw authentic in anything and say, yeah, that counts. I feel like it's this amorphous thing that we didn't really.
It really is, yeah.
For the record, I don't agree with you.
Okay.
I don't agree with the premise that the more you say something, the less effective it becomes.
I don't either. I just. So if Caleb is the person who says I love you to everybody, when he says it to me, perhaps it doesn't mean as much to me as if Craig were to say it to me, because Craig doesn't throw the L word around for anybody.
So that would be like an exceptional circumstance.
Right. So
and you know that because you have all this context with Craig.
Right, but in that situation, to Caleb, it means as much as it does when Craig says it. When Caleb says it, it means as much. To me, it means far less. Because he just throws it around.
How dare you love people, Caleb?
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
God.
I guess.
I need to tie back because I'm standing on my new hill. The description that we gave, or the definition that we gave of authenticity, I feel like we kind of all agreed in a nutshell it means to be true to yourself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where I'm kind of struggling with this idea of like we can say that's authentic and that's not, because it's all individualized. Like something can be authentic to you and not authentic to someone else because they haven't had that experience or they don't have that lens. I maybe I'm getting in my own head too much about it, but to me, the word has lost all meaning because something that is authentic to me is solely going to be defined that way to me.
So we've come to realize that the human experience is not universal and nothing is authentic.
Yes.
Finally, consensus.
We brought it around.
So what would you say to like Shakespeare writing, "There's nothing new under the sun"? Because I can guarantee you that in the span of human existence,
I would say, Bill, you idiot, you made up like 400 words.
Yeah.
Those were all new.
Under the sun.
Probably under a lamp.
I think it's kind of funny that I have had that thought many, many times. That like all arts, all writing, it's all been done before. It's all rehashing of the same thing. Mm-hmm. But in this instance, I am feeling the opposite. It's like, no, people can create genuinely new things and do all the time. You know, the experience continues to change and morph. And to say something's not authentic because we don't have a touchstone for it, I mean, that doesn't work.
I wanted to know where your point was going about a billion, whatever. Yeah, what you were going to say.
Like, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, you're talking. Yeah, you were.
Yeah, like I guarantee you that whatever experience you're having, someone else in the human experience, in human history, has experienced that thing as well. I'm not saying every single person, but someone. Like, you're never going to be alone in any experience that you have.
I would fight you on that a little bit, only in the amount of detail. You can generalize anything to match another situation and match another scenario, but to the level at which things happen to individuals, everything is a unique experience. No one has ever had my assortment of atoms in the universe before.
Or your specific set of experiences in the exact formulation,
right?
Of which you've experienced.
I think the scope at which you look at an experience matters when you're defining what is authentic or what is comparable or unique to an individual.
So circling back to like authorial intent, do you think that matters? Do you think it matters what the author intends to convey? Or do you think it only matters what the consumer of the media sees or gains from it?
Well, like one of the interesting things I've read was about like Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Everybody's like, that's about censorship. They're burning books. I was just reading an article lately saying that Ray Bradbury intended it to be about like our declining attention spans due to the TV. Like he was not intending a censorship allegory, which I thought was interesting because like that's what I was taught by an English teacher back in high school.
Yeah.
That Fahrenheit 451 was about censorship,
Right.
but his own authorial intent was, you folks are losing your attention span because of the idiot box, and I want to show you that world.
It was new media versus old media.
Yeah. So I think it doesn't matter. Authorial intent. Honestly. So
I don't remember if it was English 101 or 201, but yeah, it was very important in that class that the death of the author happens, and regardless of what their intent was, the use of literary devices that carries weight, and the way that you perceive it is far more important than what the author meant. And I agree with that.
yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly. Like I said, I think I was an idiot when I was in high school, and I was like, no, what the author meant, like that's the way it should be taken, and they should be held responsible. It's like, no, like everyone has their own lens, everyone is their own individual, and how they perceive something is going to be built upon their experiences.
Right.
But how about yourself, Stacy?
You know, I struggle
Yeah.
with it a bit. I think that if the author doesn't matter, if the context doesn't matter, if all of the external stuff doesn't matter, and you're only looking at the work, like that is one way of looking at art. But I think you lose a lot of the context, right? So you're going back to the metaphor of like looking at someone longingly, right? Or lovingly, or whatever adjective was used. You're losing a lot of that context of like, well, Sylvia Plath struggled all her life with depression. Or, you know, like the reason why this author like found a way to be as articulate and impassioned as they were to produce art, I think that matters.
I would say it enhances as opposed to matters. I don't know what the difference between the two is, but I like it. And I think enhances the work, knowing the authorial intent enhances the work, but also experiencing the work myself, my feelings matter and how I felt about it and how it made me feel and how it made me think.
Oh yeah, I'm not trying to say it matters more.
I would put that my feelings matter more in regards to the authorial intent.
You know, I would go back to the example of Fahrenheit 451. It wasn't intended to be an allegory for censorship, but it became a very powerful one, one that resonates very well across culture, well, at least across Western cultures. So knowing his intent, that does enhance what's going on in the book, but the truth of the book is really something completely different than even what he intended.
You guys keep saying enhance. I would almost say skews. Again, once you increase the scope of your knowledge around a piece of art, that skews how you perceive it, because you are adding external factors to how you look at something.
Well, sure, but there's the common argument, when, especially in literature classes, where a student says, why are we analyzing why the author chose to make the curtains blue? It doesn't matter. Maybe they were just blue. And that's possibly true. But the author still mentioned that. Even if they didn't consciously have a reason for it, there is a reason they said it's blue.
Rob, when you sit down and play an RPG and you're DMing, do you want your players to agonize over every little detail that you're putting into the scene, or are you just putting some fluff in sometimes? because you need to describe the situation.
The fluff is there to imply the greater existence of the world and to imply that other things matter.
Okay.
I'm going to blatantly steal a thought right now, and I don't remember who said it, but in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams went into a huge amount of detail on why hitchhikers carry a towel and why it's so important that you need to carry a towel. And he did all of that so you don't ask any other questions, because you got this great answer on why he's carrying a towel. Why is Ford have his towel? Why is it so important to him? Mm-hmm. Well, that's the reason. Okay, well, why is this so important to him?
It's the magician saying, look over here.
There's a reason. Yeah. I don't know it. It's there.
It just, validates the rest of the universe.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless you're Carrie and you focus on a trapeze artist that had nothing to do with the fucking story. That was, we're playing a DM or we're playing Dungeons and Dragons game.
Sure. I think the example that sticks out to me in literature of like the details mattering, which I guess it is part of authorial intent, but I think it's just like the magic of art, right?
Mm-hmm.
And symbolism in general. In The Great Gatsby, there's a scene where after or during a party, the parties retreat into this library, and the narrator picks up a book, and he realizes that in this giant, beautiful, extravagant library, which is like one of the best he'd ever seen, right? The books, they used to be made so that like the pages that you can open were like sealed, right? So they were like, I'm having a trouble describing like what the importance of this is, but like, so the pages were not able to be read because they were like not cut. The pages weren't cut.
Oh, they were a decoration.
So they were strictly ornamentation. Yeah. No, like, meaning was literally not able to be gleaned.
Sure.
Right? And I think of that as like a metaphor for like blue curtain, like people make fun of like, well, you know, blue curtains or whatever. Mm-hmm. But like, I think that's the magic of art, is that there are certain like tells, right? Certain symbols that we all like kind of relate to and understand as like, this has a part in a conversation that's not necessarily being brought up here, but like it's a quick way to like access this whole other conversation.
So the authors, they're lying to you to put thoughts into your mind to make you feel certain ways, like the propagandist.
Lying? Is that lying to say that the books were not able to be read? That the curtains were blue?
The curtains didn't exist.
But blue curtains do exist.
Right, but not those curtains in that window in that apartment.
But the beauty of art is that you can insert yourself.
That's what I was saying! That was my point!
I believe you. No, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay. That's good enough for me. What a perfect spot to end our discussion here. Agreeing with me, that's great.
Thanks for allowing me to come and talk about authenticity and tragedy and
the amorphous blob that is authenticity.
Yeah, whatever it means.
I'm still grumpy about it.
Well, thank you for being here. It was an incredibly fascinating discussion.
Yep.
Yeah, I had a really good time.
Yeah, we don't always bring the most thought-provoking ideas when it's just the three of us. So we really appreciate you coming in.
It's really just like, I like this movie.
Yeah. That movie's bad. You shouldn't like it. That's
well, what about the sequel?
That's how these conversations
reboots. Yeah.
But in a way, that is talking about whether you think that art is authentic to you.
Don't encourage us.
Yeah, but what you don't realize is that I've been lying the whole time since we started it, so I've been inauthentic since the beginning.
But it did authentically strike our fancy.
Yeah, it did.
I hate this. I hate this so much.
Should we do final words? Any final words?
Art is art. I mean, I don't know it, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah, that's. I think I'm in the same boat. Like, art is what it is to you, and if it's authentic to your experience, that's great. Mm-hmm. And if it's not, then it's also great because it's a view into something that you've never experienced before. I mean, either way, it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Yeah. Last thought: Ray Bradbury would have hated TikTok.
If you, listener, have any thoughts on anything you've heard tonight, or want to share your particular opinions on authenticity, or have a particular piece of art that maybe has struck your fancy and you just want to tell us about it,
tell us your trauma.
You can reach out to us at strikesourfancy@gmail.com, or you can leave us a voice message by following the link in the description of this episode.
Something you've never offered, though. They could Instagram us.
They could,
or TikTok us.
Yeah, I don't actually know how you communicate on TikTok and Instagram. Can you actually send DMs?
Just slide into my DMs,
okay.
Listener.
Right.
So, also next week, we will be talking about the nature of horror and the human experience, and we'll be bringing some of our favorite scary stories. If you want to chime in on that, please leave us a message.
Thanks so much, as always, for listening in. And again, thank you, Stacy, for joining us. I've been malcontent Craig.
I have changed my mind, Rob.
I am distraught Caleb.
I guess I'm masochistic Stacy.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.